He was known to the world as a symbol of power, discipline, and unmatched financial success, yet behind the guarded gates of his private estate, a very different reality unfolded every night. According to sources close to the family, the billionaire's life changed irreversibly the day his only daughter disappeared. What initially appeared as a temporary crisis soon evolved into a long-term tragedy that no amount of wealth could resolve. International investigators were hired, private security firms were mobilized, and media attention briefly surged, but as months turned into years, leads faded and hope weakened. The public moved on, but for the father, time froze at the moment he last heard her voice. Despite maintaining a flawless public image, those who worked closely with him describe a man living on autopilot. Board meetings were conducted with precision, mergers were approved without hesitation, and profits continued to rise, yet his eyes carried a permanent heaviness. Employees noticed that his once commanding presence had become distant, almost mechanical. He rarely spoke unless necessary, avoided celebrations, and showed no interest in accolades that once defined his identity. Behind closed doors, his nights followed a painful routine, marked by silence, memories, and uncontrollable grief. Staff members at his residence revealed that lights in his study remained on until early morning hours. He would often sit alone, reviewing old family videos and photographs stored on a private server. In these images, his daughter appeared smiling, full of life, unaware of the future that awaited her family. Sources say he replayed these moments repeatedly, as if doing so could somehow bring her back or preserve a connection that reality had taken away. Each night ended the same way, with quiet tears and an empty room that echoed with absence. Friends and associates gradually stopped visiting. Invitations went unanswered, and social gatherings became rare. Even longtime partners sensed an invisible wall that separated him from the rest of the world. Psychologists familiar with cases of unresolved loss note that such behavior is common when grief has no closure, and those close to the billionaire believe this was precisely his condition. He was not only mourning his daughter but also the future he imagined with her, graduations, milestones, and a life that would now never unfold as planned. What made the situation even more striking was the contrast between his external success and internal collapse. Financial reports continued to label him as one of the most influential figures in global business, yet within his own home, wealth offered no comfort. Expensive art hung untouched, grand halls remained silent, and rooms once filled with laughter became reminders of what was lost. According to household staff, he refused to change anything in his daughter's room, preserving it exactly as it was, as if she might return at any moment. Media outlets occasionally referenced his personal tragedy, often framing it as a dramatic footnote in the story of a powerful man. However, those close to him insist the reality was far deeper and far more painful than any headline suggested. The billionaire reportedly blamed himself, replaying past decisions and questioning moments he could never change. This self-blame became an unspoken burden, intensifying his nightly suffering and isolating him further from human connection. In public appearances, his face remained controlled, his words carefully measured, but insiders noticed subtle signs of exhaustion. His voice lacked warmth, his expressions rarely changed, and moments of silence stretched longer than before. Analysts who followed his career noted a decline in interviews and a complete withdrawal from personal storytelling, suggesting a man who no longer wished to explain himself to the world. As years passed without answers, hope transformed into something quieter and heavier, a constant ache rather than an active search. Yet every night, according to those closest to him, he still cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that reflected a wound that never healed. His story, at this stage, was not one of redemption or recovery, but of unresolved loss, showing that even at the highest levels of wealth and influence, a broken heart remains painfully human. The shift in his life did not begin with a major decision or a public revelation, but with a moment so ordinary that it almost went unnoticed. Inside one of his downtown office buildings, late in the evening when most executives had already left, the billionaire encountered a cleaner finishing her shift. This was not unusual in itself, as he often worked long hours, but what made the moment different was the presence of a small child sitting quietly nearby. The boy waited patiently, holding a worn backpack, clearly accustomed to these late evenings. When their eyes met, the child smiled and offered a simple greeting, unaware of the man's identity or status. According to employees who witnessed the interaction, the billionaire paused in a way that surprised everyone. For a brief second, the layers of authority, wealth, and emotional armor seemed to fall away. He returned the greeting, awkwardly at first, then with a softness rarely seen. That exchange lasted only a few seconds, yet it left a lasting impression. Staff members later remarked that something about the child's expression reminded him of his own daughter at that age, long before the world had taken her away. In the days that followed, similar encounters occurred. The cleaner continued bringing her child after school due to financial necessity, and the billionaire found himself lingering longer in the building, adjusting his schedule without consciously realizing why. He began to notice the boy's quiet curiosity, the way he observed everything around him, and how he spoke without fear or expectation. Unlike adults who approached the billionaire with caution or ulterior motives, the child treated him as just another person in the room. Colleagues began to sense a subtle change. Meetings felt less tense, his tone less abrupt. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried a calmness that had been absent for years. One executive later described it as a thawing, as if a long, internal winter was slowly giving way to something warmer. While no one dared to ask directly, many suspected the reason lay in those quiet evenings at the office. The billionaire eventually learned more about the cleaner's life, not through interrogation, but through casual conversation. She spoke of long hours, rising costs, and the struggle of raising a child alone. These were realities far removed from his own world, yet they resonated with him on a deeply human level. He saw resilience where society often saw invisibility, and responsibility where others might see inconvenience. For the first time in years, he felt connected to a story that was unfolding in the present, not frozen in the past. What struck him most was the child's laughter. It echoed through the otherwise sterile hallways, breaking the silence that had dominated his life. Witnesses say there were moments when he simply stood still, listening, as if absorbing a sound he feared he might never hear again. That laughter did not erase his pain, but it reminded him that joy could still exist alongside grief, not as a betrayal of loss, but as a continuation of love. Over time, he began small acts of kindness, careful to avoid attention. Extra food left behind, flexible schedules approved without explanation, quiet assistance offered without conditions. These actions were not driven by charity or guilt, but by a growing awareness that human connection had been missing from his life. In helping someone else survive their daily struggles, he found himself slowly returning to the world of the living. Psychologists often note that healing does not arrive through force or logic, but through repeated exposure to warmth and meaning. In this case, it came through a child who asked nothing and expected nothing. The billionaire did not speak about his daughter, nor did he explain his behavior, yet those close to him understood that something fundamental was changing. His grief was no longer sealed in isolation, it was being gently reshaped by empathy, presence, and the quiet reminder of what still mattered. This phase of his story was not about resolution, but about awakening. The pain remained, but it was no longer the only emotion guiding his days. For the first time in years, the billionaire was not just surviving his loss, he was beginning, slowly and uncertainly, to feel again. The transformation that followed did not announce itself through press releases or public gestures, but through a series of deliberate, deeply personal choices. Those close to the billionaire say the presence of the cleaner's child did not replace the pain of losing his daughter, nor did it offer a simple solution to years of unanswered questions. Instead, it gave him permission to acknowledge emotions he had long suppressed. He began to understand that grief did not require him to withdraw from the world, and that opening his heart again did not diminish the love he held for his lost child. Over time, his relationship with the cleaner and her son evolved into one built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. He ensured their stability quietly, arranging educational support for the child and easing financial pressures without ever positioning himself as a savior. Insiders emphasize that he was careful to preserve the family's dignity, offering help in ways that felt natural and unforced. In doing so, he rediscovered a sense of responsibility that extended beyond balance sheets and corporate strategies. This shift soon influenced his broader outlook on life and leadership. Employees noticed that he began asking different questions, ones that focused less on profit margins and more on long-term impact. Workplace policies gradually changed, reflecting a greater sensitivity to family needs and mental well-being. While these changes were subtle, they marked a clear departure from the rigid, results-only culture that once defined his companies. According to internal reports, employee morale improved, and loyalty strengthened, suggesting that compassion had become an unexpected asset. The billionaire's personal grief also found a new direction. After years of private suffering, he chose to channel his pain into action. Without seeking publicity, he funded initiatives dedicated to missing children, supporting search efforts, counseling services, and families living in the same uncertainty he had endured. These efforts were not framed as philanthropy alone, but as a continuation of his role as a father, even in the absence of answers. Those involved in the programs describe his involvement as hands-on and sincere, driven by understanding rather than obligation. Friends who had long been kept at a distance began to reappear in his life. Conversations that once felt impossible slowly returned, not centered on business or loss, but on shared memories and future possibilities. While he never stopped hoping for news of his daughter, he no longer allowed that hope to trap him in paralysis. Psychologists familiar with his journey describe this as a critical shift, where grief transforms from a force that isolates into one that informs purpose. Perhaps the most telling change was in his evenings. The sleepless nights did not disappear overnight, but the weight they carried began to lighten. Instead of revisiting only memories of the past, he started reading, writing, and occasionally reflecting on ways to honor his daughter's spirit through meaningful action. The tears still came, but they were no longer accompanied solely by despair. There was room now for gratitude, for connection, and for the recognition that love could survive even the deepest loss. Observers note that his story has since resonated far beyond his immediate circle. Not because he is wealthy or influential, but because his experience mirrors a universal truth. Loss can strip life of meaning, but meaning can be rebuilt through compassion and shared humanity. The cleaner's child did not change the past, nor did he erase tragedy. What he offered was something far more powerful, a reminder that life continues to ask for presence, kindness, and courage, even when answers never arrive. Today, those who know the billionaire describe a man still marked by sorrow, yet no longer defined by it. His identity has expanded beyond grief to include purpose, empathy, and quiet strength. The transformation remains ongoing, shaped by daily choices rather than dramatic conclusions. In the end, his journey stands as a testament to the idea that healing is not found in forgetting, but in learning how to carry loss while still choosing to care, to act, and to remain open to the fragile, persistent hope that comes from human connection.